So page 25 is this diagram that I often do for parents that are trying to figure out, oh, you know, what's wrong with my kid? Is it the end of the world? And that's when I like this diagram here. I think it says a lot. It's oversimplified, pretty much like everything I do, but it works, so I'm okay with it. So here's this line, this curve that goes from, I'm going to call it verbal or left brain, verbal thinking, to our right brain, visual spatial. And if we do a bell curve, let's see if I can do a kind of a bell curve here. We're going to be like kind of like, you know, there's the 80%. So there's kind of a lopsided bell curve, okay? And let's say this is the middle, give or take. There we go. There's a bell curve. Okay, so we have this middle of the bell curve with, you know, plus or minus standard 1 or 2 standard deviations. And that gives us that majority, that 80%. Does that make sense? And this 80% is our solid, and it's in your book already on page 25, but that's okay. But this gives us, in school, you see this is our solid C+ to B+. These guys do pretty well in the class, as a whole. Most people, somebody along the way will ask me, well, what about this over here? Okay, this is like total verbal, okay, non-visual at all. When you get this far enough over here, you cannot tell the difference between what you're thinking, that voice in your head, and what's real. Right. There's no distinction there. So that's like schizophrenic and psychotic, and you know, we don't see these guys. They don't show up in class. They have bigger problems to deal with.
Like my son will hear directions a totally different way than what's said.
That's different.
Okay.
That's different. We'll get to that one later. No, this is not being able to distinguish reality.
Okay.
So you're not going to see. They got way bigger problems than just algebra.
Right.
Okay. But in this group, near the top of this B+, something happens, and there's this really, really cool group. Right up here, there's this little group, just a few percent of the population. A+. A+. These guys don't even have to crack a book. They know what's going on. They've got it all down. They can pass every test. These guys go on to law school. If they want, they go to law school, medical school. They do whatever they want. Does that make sense? Very intelligent, but they're able to use their intelligence. They're able to store massive amounts of information and organize it in a way that's useful and retrievable. Very awesome set of skills. And then what happens? Well, there's this funny little line that's a little bit different for everybody. Remember, this is only one scale of several various skills and everything. But when you cross this line, guess what happens? The grades go from A+ to D+. You'd think that they would be on opposite sides of the scale. They're not. In most cases, now I'm not saying there are kids that aren't intelligent for whatever reason. What I'm saying is there's a group of kids that are A+ and a group of kids that are D+ that are very, very close together in terms of the way they process information and in terms of intelligence. This is exciting for me. This is what is really the fun part of what I do, because this is a surprise to most people. This is a surprise to the parents, to the kids. When kids can go from not spelling the word the to spelling efflorescence forwards and backwards. And I don't really like to make women cry, but sometimes it's kind of fun to blow parents away. And And you got to be careful because you don't want to overload the kids, you know, too early. But I mean, literally, I've taken 7-year-olds who their parents are getting all kinds of flack. They can't spell the word there or were or here. They're not just not getting it. And in 2 weeks, I have them come in and I teach them how to spell efflorescence, forwards and backwards. And I like that word because it means like unfolding. It's like blossoming, you know. So it's kind of a cool word. That's a good girl word. For the boys, I give them like platycephalus or something, means flathead. You know, they like that one. But it's just a strategy. It's giving them a new way to process information, and you see this unbelievable success. It's very cool. So it's very doable in a lot of cases to get this group over to here with the addition of a few skills and strategies. But across this line, what do we see here? What do we see in this little group here? Well, we see a lot of ADHD across this line. We see a lot of sensory integration disorder, although they now call it something else. Auditory processing disorder. Anybody remember the new name for that now? It's sensory processing dysfunction or something like
right.
sensory anyway. You also see, and remember, these are all considered pervasive development disorders. So you'll see Asperger's syndrome. You'll obviously PDD-NOS, and then up in this group here, at the very end of the scale, is your autism. Also in this group, you'll see obsessive compulsive behaviors or disorder. You'll see eventually, if the kids get frustrated enough, you'll see, and they can't trust the adults around them, you'll see oppositional defiant. Okay? You'll also see dyslexia won't be uncommon. It may or may not be diagnosed, but when you get a high visual learner, a high visual thinker that can't read, most of the time it's because their brain's just turning everything into gibberish. My 30-second. This is my 30-second, 1-minute explanation of dyslexia. Is it medically exactly right? No, it's a model. It's a model. But in my experience, it works 99% and 95% of the time as a way of getting to the point and solving the problem. So in the real world, remember, we're visual spatial guys. Visual spatial guys, visually spatially intelligent, puzzle solving, problem solving. In the real world, what is this?
Marker.
A marker. And in the real world, what is this now?
Upside down marker.
It's a marker. And what is it now?
Still.
A marker, 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 marker. Doesn't matter how I turn it. It's a marker, marker, marker in the real world. And if you had to relearn what this was, if you learned that this is a marker, and I turn it upside down and you go, oh, well, wait a minute, what is that now? You would be at a really serious disadvantage, right? That's a bad thing. If you didn't know that this is a marker, and this is a marker, and this is a marker, okay? But what about in this other world? What happens over here to some of these guys? Well, in this other world, in this classroom world, what's that? What would we call that, probably? A P. And if I flip it over, what is it now?
A B.
And if I flip it over the other way, what is it?
A D, yeah.
Are these interchangeable? Are these interchangeable?
Well, I mean, they are.
No, they're not.
Different things.
You try to, you know, if I read "Let's go to bed" and we flip this around to some other pad, or let's go to my pad, and you flip those around, it's not the same meaning, right? It means something very different. Let's go to my pad or let's go to my bed. Not that I would pass somebody a note for that invitation, but if you did, you know, they're not interchangeable. The rules are changing. It's like that you don't need to write down your work. Just give me the answer. And then 3 years later, no, you need to write down your work. Well, I can't write my work down because I don't think like you do. I never solved the problem the way you solved it. I had my own way of processing information. You see the way that doesn't work now? See, they didn't care what the process was as long as he came up with the right answer in the 1st and 2nd grade. Now they want him to show his process. Well, his process is like, you know, it's not like just 5 plus 5 or 3 plus 5. It's, well, 5 times 2 minus 3, or 3, you know, 3 squared minus blah, blah, blah. And wait a minute, why is she asking me the question in the first place, and who wants to know, and what am I going to look like if I answer it? And how do you write all that down?
Hence why sometimes they don't even know how they processed it.
So anyway, that's for, I think, in most cases, this is a really simple, to the point explanation of dyslexia and how we're going to approach it. So we're going to get rid of this. We're going to give them a new set of rules, so that these don't flip over and change and become like this. We're going to show that these are two different things. We're actually going to take these and bring them into this world, so that we know that those are not interchangeable anymore. Okay. How are we doing? I think we're doing pretty good. Yeah. Okay, this is awesome. Okay, I'm on schedule, guys. Give me... Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing day when my husband's on schedule, so yeah, I get that.
Oh, by the way, the little guy there with
What's in his hand?
With the, I'm not sure. What was
Is
he
it
holding?
bloody?
No, it's something fun. Candy or something. Anyway, that's Austin. He was the one that was, his mom was told that he could never learn. So here's a basic learning skills. In a lot of cases, the average guy comes in. This is the program that I'm usually going to work with in most cases. I'm going to start with stress reduction, so that we can actually control what's going on in our head and get both sides of the brain working together. We're going to help increase focus and organization. We're going to get a handle on how he processes information. What are his strengths? Is he an auditory processor? You don't run into it much, but sometimes you do. Usually those guys are doing okay in school. How does he process information visually? Is he visually constructing everything in pieces, or does he rely on his visual memory, or some combination? Does he connect kinesthetically to his what he sees, or does he need to verify it some way? Does that make sense? So we're going to look at those strategies and learn how to decode those, and then we're going to come up with these basic skills. Reading. Ideally, I like to have my high school guys reading at 400 words a minute. Okay? Remember that whole thing about staying focused? Guess what happens when you're reading at 400 words a minute? You don't have time to drift off. See, when you're reading, if you can only read at 180 or 80 or 120 words a minute, that is it's like listening to your teacher again. So your brain drifts off, right? So you get a quarter of the way down the page and you go, oh crap, what was I just reading?
Yes.
And then you go back and you start reading it again, and next thing you know, you're in the Bahamas, right? And you, oh dang, come back. And you do that, right? And after 4 or 5 times, you may get through the page, right?
You may have walked away.
But guess what? Guess what? If you can learn how to read at 400 words or more, that doesn't happen anymore. Cool?
Yeah.
All right. Memorization. There's memorization strategies for spelling words, vocabulary words, math concepts, story information like you would get in history, and very abstract information like you'll get in science. And they're a little bit different. There's a common theme, but they're a little bit different. Little different ways that you can do that. Note taking, which again comes into play later on, but the conventional wisdom, if you look at advanced, what do they have in some of the schools? Oh, they call it some kind of
Shorthand.
ACE program or active program or something like. They have some special program for kids that like really want to go to college. Well, what do? They automatically force them to use Cornell Notes, okay? Which is this the kid. I mean, I've seen some of their notebooks at the end. They're like this thick, pages and pages and pages of notes. For our guys, useless, useless. For one thing, without training, we can't listen and write at the same time. Okay?
Barely listen.
That's a problem in a lecture.
Yeah.
That's a real problem if you've been told to write everything down and you can't listen and write at the same time. The most you can get is about half of what the person's saying.
Right.
And if it's the wrong half, you're screwed.
Because you're distracted by one or the other. You can't get them both in
No.
there. Yeah.
We have to say what it is we write. Now, is there an advanced skill that I teach like junior high and above? I mean not junior high, junior, like 16, 17 and above, where you can learn to write without thinking. You can listen out there and write. Yes, but that's an advanced skill. It's not something I teach until kids are at least 16 or 17. So we have two different strategies for note-taking there. Writing composition. Again, we talked about those presuppositions and assumptions about how a child understands to write a sentence, a paragraph, or an entire essay. If those assumptions are wrong for that child, they're going to struggle. And guess what? It's not the normal, straight-thinking kids that have struggles. It's the outside-the-box thinkers that struggle with that kind of putting those thoughts together. So that's an essential skill. Mental math, you got to know when to do it mentally and when to write it down. And if you mix those up, you're in trouble. You're going to hit a wall. You're going to hit the wall. And then there's a way to check your math, which doesn't feel like you're going backwards, but nobody's ever taught that. Nobody's ever taught that if you do your math a certain way and write it out a certain way, you can check it in literally in 5 or 10 seconds. See, and if they were taught that, would he mind spending 10 seconds to make sure he has the right answer?
It's hard to say.
Maybe not. But what if he reevaluated his purpose for doing the problem?
Right.
What if the purpose of doing the problem was to get credit?
Right.
You play sports. You want to
Right.
get the home run.
Right.
You don't want to run around the bases and not get a point.
Right.
You don't want to stand in the end zone with the football and not get those 7 points. You want to get credit for it.
Right.
So we kind of anchor and install the point of doing the work is to get credit for it,
Right.
not to just get through it.
Well, that is the only reason he does the work, is to get the credit. And then
Right.
he gets frustrated if he does work. He puts hard work into it,
Mm-hmm.
And then teacher's like, oh yeah, I'm not happy with this, and doesn't give him credit. Some teachers do that
Right.
kind of crap, and then that's just it. You can't get him to do anything the rest of the year after that because there's
He's been burned.
Exactly.
He's been burned. Right? It's not like why do kids stop studying? Well, you study for 2 hours the way you were taught to study, and you get a C- on the test.
Right.
Well, crap! I could have gone skateboarding for 2 hours and gotten a D.
Right.
Who cares about a little minus or whatever? Who cares about the difference?
Right.
I'd rather save the 2 hours and have fun.
Exactly.
So, yeah. But if he knew absolutely that he could study for 25 minutes and get a B+ or better on that test, would he be willing to do that?
Probably.
Maybe.
Hopefully.
See? I mean, hopefully, yes.
Yes.
But it's a very different view, a very different experience studying for 20 minutes to get a B or a B+, and spending an hour and a half and getting a C-.
Right.
Test preparation, test taking. This is another place where you really got to look at stress. Time tests is big for some kids. Throws us into fight or flight. If everything we've learned is auditory and our auditory brain shuts down, bad news. And as a result of doing this and working and all this stuff, we want to start building our confidence. We want to get the focus on our successes. Usually I like to bring kids back to the point where it's 80% success. I love that 80-20. I don't know why. It's so handy. 80% success, 20% challenge. That's going to build your self-esteem. That's going to build your confidence. If you're failing, if you get up on your bicycle and you fall, 4 times out of 5 or 3 times out of 5, is that ever going to become a natural strategy? Is your brain ever going to say, "Ooh, this is what I want to do"? No. So you gotta, if you want something to become a habit, you gotta get it to the point where they're at least minimum 80% success. Maybe even for some things even better than that. Self-esteem, and then like we talked about, when they start doing better, when they feel like they can be successful, and they don't suck, there tends to be some self-motivation. And we also bring in some other strategies, connecting the activities to their goals, to what's important to them, and get it on the table. Because if it's unconscious, if it's in the background, it doesn't count. If his reality is, I'm going to school because my mom makes me, I'm doing my homework because my mom's making me, that's not effective. That's not going to serve him. At some point, that system will break down. He's got to take ownership. He's got to get out of that delusion and realize you're doing your homework because it's important to your life. What you eat, where you live, who you sleep with, all that is going to be affected by your education. All of it. And so this is really big, important stuff. And to feel that and to connect with that is going to make all those little tasks much easier to bear. Much easier to bear if it feels important. Okay. So, what do we mean when we talk about learning strategies? I think everybody gets styles, right? Does everybody pretty much understand the basic 2 learning styles? Those 2 preferences, leaning left brain or right brain, auditory, visual, right? So what do we mean by strategies? Well, strategies are the processes, the mental processes, or a combination of mental processes that we use to store, access, and manipulate information. That make sense? Now, fortunately for us, a long time ago, some guys came up with some pretty dependable ways of spotting people's strategies, and it's by watching their eyes. Very cool stuff. It's not complicated, and it's very, very reliable. Unless, of course, somebody tells you about it, and you're thinking about it, and you're being very very conscious about it, and then you start trying to do other things. But most of the time, the strategy will still bear out. So, in its simplest form, and this can get very complex, and there's people who want to take this to our even higher level. If you haven't done so, like Kathy, she's already, what are you, like some master super trainer, or in NLP now?
Master practitioner.
Master practitioner. Don't you have your trainer's training?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, you got your trainer's training. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. And I would recommend that to anyone who really wants to go to the next level at some point. You don't need it now, but at some point, I think NLP is really powerful in a lot of ways. So there's a lot that there's all kinds of levels you can go with this. But in its form, for our purposes, it's really handy to be able to look at a child and say, what's 2 times 2? And they go 4. What's 3 times 3? 9. What's 6 times 8? 46. No, 48. You see the difference? I mean, that's you don't have to be like super observant and like be able to really figure like some subtle. You're not reading his heart rate or his breathing or the size of his lips or anything like that. Pupil dilation. I mean, it's just like, okay, boom, you hit the cutoff point. You went past the threshold, so he was visual, visual, visual. Okay, all of a sudden, visual, auditory, auditory, digital, visual again, kinesthetic.
He's just searching for that answer anywhere.
He's like walking around his brain with a flashlight, going, okay, I know it's in here somewhere. I learned this somewhere, and so very, very handy. So we rely a lot on IQs, body language. You know, if you say, oh, how was school today? And they go, okay, all right, maybe there's some negative emotion, you know. How do you do in math? Okay, there's some negative, there's some negative anchoring there that you may need to deal with to help them move on and feel successful. So IQs, body language, and so now let's look at a strategy. Let's look at a simple strategy. Very common, very common. I like this comparison because every child in the United States is taught to spell this way. And every child who has ever won a spelling bee or any spelling contest or is a really, really good speller does not spell this way. So I love this comparison. It's simple and to the point. So how are we all taught to spell? We're all taught to read and spell phonetically by breaking the word down into little pieces, right? Keeping those pieces in the same order because we all think sequentially, right? So that should be easy for all of us. And then relating to the exact sound of those pieces, decoding each of those sounds, because we're all good auditory thinkers and that should be easy too. And then reconstructing them into some kind of a picture that makes sense, and having that auditory, the sound and the picture mean something in a way that gives us a feeling of recognition, called a synesthesia. Okay? That sound and or picture results in a feeling, that connection of sound and an auditory kinesthetic synesthesia. Okay? And what does that synesthesia know? It lets us know that we have the right answer. Oh, somebody's unhappy.
Getting late.
It is getting late, so we're going to be done. And you go around, loop, 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 repeat, repeat, and you hopefully get that feeling that gives you a sense that you know the words right. And that's how we're all taught to spell. Works pretty well for 80% of the folks out there, especially the ones that are smart enough to know and realize that this doesn't work all the time, and they automatically come up with another strategy which does work, which is you memorize the way the word looks, forget about how it sounds, and you just spell it. You spell it based on a visual recollection. And that visual recollection, which is in one piece, it needs no decoding. It needs no piecing together and putting it back together like Humpty Dumpty, right? So it needs no order and sequence. It needs no sequential processing. It's just a thing. It's like looking at a picture of your house or a picture of your car or whatever. It just, you see it, it's there, and you recognize it. I go like this, you see me do this later, because that feeling of recognition is almost always on the midline. It occurs either in the head, the chest, or the tummy. A gut feeling. It's a feeling of recognition. And that feeling of recognition allows me to know that I have the right answer. Without that, if I don't have that, I am guessing. And how many moms, you will find out, if you don't have the experience yourself, how many moms have the experience of maybe even helping their child study for a test, spending that 2 hours or hour and a half, and you know they answered all the questions right, you send them to school, you drive them to school the next day, they're feeling really confident, and you're feeling confident. It's like, okay, now we're really going to get this one. This is in the bag. The fix is in. We have got it nailed. And you pick him up at 3 o'clock, he gets in the car, and the first thing you ask is,
how'd the test go?
How'd the test go? And what is his answer?
Sucks.
or maybe suck, or what else do they know? A lot of times, what do they say?
They think it went well?
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. The honest answer very often is, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? And it's like, then the first thing that comes up for the parents is, do you not care? Are you not, how can you not know? We just spent an hour and a half. You knew the right answers. How can you not know? The truth is, he really doesn't.
Right.
Because the next day, he kind of has some vague recollection of what answers should fit where, but because it's a verbal experience and he doesn't live there, he's literally guessing on every single question.
It's got to be one of those things that's floating around in my head. And
It's got to be somewhere in there.
Connects
So what
to.
what he does, he reads the question and he goes, okay, so, and remember, we're looking at a puzzle-solving brain. Okay, a puzzle-solving brain. So he reads the question and his brain goes, okay, so I read A, okay, volcanoes, okay, volcanoes. And he's saying it. See, I'm saying it, I'm reading it, I'm in the words, and do the words sound right? Well, vaguely, they kind of sound like they make sense. Well, let's read answer B. So we read answer B, and we read it, and then, well, yeah, that's sort of, well, if I look at it this way, it kind of fits too. Then we go down the list of the answers, right? So now what? Well, they all kind of make sense depending upon how you look at them. Well, it's, all right, B. I'll go with B. No synesthesia, no feeling of recognition. So we're going to talk about that, because that is going to make or break most kids in a test. If they don't have a feeling of recognition, even if they do relatively well, they're not even going to feel like they did well. They're going to walk away feeling like they're guessing on their test. So this is really critical. I know you probably haven't even heard this. You've never heard this word before. I'll write it down. Synesthesia. Synesthesia. Now, if you look this up in like what is it? Kritowick. It's probably the best book I know. There's a couple of books on it. There's The Man Who Tasted Shapes. Some pretty cool things. But this is probably, from a medical standpoint, Richard E. Kritowick, Synesthesia, Union of Senses. Probably the best book out there that I know of. The way we're using synesthesia is not in the, let's call it the natural sense. It's not in as in a person smells shapes or sees letters in colors, things like, or numbers in colors. It's not actually in that strictest medical sense. But in my experience over these years, if this is not present, if you do not either get an auditory kinesthetic synesthesia or a visual kinesthetic synesthesia, boom, see it, feel it, or hear it, feel it. If you do not get one of these, you are screwed academically. Now, which one is a child going to get that's going to be effective for them? In my opinion, if you're working with this group of kids, this is never going to happen. It's just not. It may seem like it happens if, like we did with our little 2-year-old and the first 30 digits of pi, okay, put it in a song. But is it really the sound that she's getting, or is it pattern recognition? Is it a right brain pattern recognition? Is it a, you know, 1 4 1 5 9 2 6 da 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 da, you know? Does that make sense? So I think I can already kind of tell she's a visual learner. Okay, takes after her dad and her mom. So in my opinion, I think this can be learned, but I've had so much bad experience in it, I don't usually go there anymore. I mean, I've actually talked myself out of speeches. I visualized my speech, I learned it visually, and then I started rehearsing it auditorily, and I actually forgot it. The more I rehearsed it, the less I knew. I was like, wow, that is amazing. That I could actually unlearn myself, or talk. So anyway, I think our audience, this is where the gold is. This visual kinesthetic. Boom. That's where we're going to find the gold for most of the kids we're working with. And the funny thing is, like I said, everyone who has ever won a spelling bee or a spelling contest, this is their primary strategy. See it. Anybody see the movie Akil and the Bee? Anybody ever watch that one? The little girl from like L.A.
Yeah.
Crenshaw, you know, who goes on to win the National Spelling Bee. Well, I love the last scene where, you know, they give her this word and she looks up and she visualizes all the people that helped her spell that word, right, all along the way, right? It was very cool, very cool. But it was very also, for me, metaphorical for the way all good spellers spell. The backup strategy is learning the roots and the idioms and the language of origin and all that other stuff. And then the very, very last strategy, which I even mentioned in the movie, if all else fails, just spell it the way it sounds. You sound it out and spell it. That's the very, very last resort, the last strategy. Anyway, so I love this contrast, very, very dynamic, between a strategy that we're all taught in school and it's presumed to work for everybody. And I got to tell you, if you tell people that you teach reading without using phonics, somewhere along the way, you're going to get some dirty looks. Because they're going to be like, are you out of your mind? You can't teach reading without phonics. It's defined like as this. I mean, every psychologist or occupational therapist or whoever will tell you that reading is defined as an auditory process. Oh, really? How do you teach someone deaf to read? Right? If someone was deaf, how would you teach them to read? Would you still teach them phonics?
Probably not.
You may, but I think you're going to have a long haul. You're going to have a long haul. No, I would teach them to read visually. You see the words, you memorize it. Here's the picture, here's the word, here's the picture. Boom, boom, boom.
Is that like that commercial I see all the time now where they're teaching babies to read and they have the picture and which I think is just the most ridiculous thing that these babies read before they can speak. But is it that sort of same premise though of how they they just like show the word visually to them and then they make the sound like clap or I'm not sure because it's not like I ordered it.
Are you talking about the baby you can read?
Yeah, because it kind of sounds like that.
Yeah, there may be something to that. Again,
Yeah.
I don't believe there's one strategy that works for everybody, and I'm really morally opposed to. I mean, that was popular. There was like 20, 30 years ago. They were talking about super babies, and you could teach them to do addition and subtraction,
it's like teaching monkeys.
all kinds of stuff, and they could. Yeah, but here's what they found. 5 years later, those kids were seriously messed up.
Yeah.
By trying to teach them that, and when it became developmentally appropriate to learn that level of abstraction, they were messed up. They were out of sync with everyone else in their classroom.
Yeah.
And while they should have been learning to, like cross their midlines by crawling and touching things and playing in the dirt and experiencing things visually and experientially and tactily, they were busy absorbing all this nonsense, which is basically like throwing them in front of the TV set. Let them watch Sesame Street 10 hours a day. Sure, they'll learn a bunch of stuff, but is it really going to be of value in the long run?
Right.
I really love the Waldorf model. I get a lot of examples from the Waldorf model, and you see it in reading where it looks like they're actually behind. Here's like let's say the first grade, third grade, eighth grade, okay? And you'll see the other kids, like by the first grade, they're already reading a lot of stuff, In the public school, they have to be to survive. And they start going up, they're going up. And show me a dozen kids in the 8th grade in public school who enjoy reading.
Right.
They don't do it. They don't love it. They don't like it. It's a burden. It sucks. It's like torture to get them to read. It's pulling teeth.
Yeah.
Okay? Waldorf kids, they're down here. They're barely looking at their letters in the first grade.
Right.
And then the second grade, they're getting some stories and a little bit. Third grade, they're just starting to really read. And guess what? Look what happens.
Right.
Around the fifth grade, they go here and talk to 6 Waldorf kids and ask them how many books they read in the last month or something. And what did they read for fun? What did they read for pleasure?
Right.
Big difference. Because their experience of reading is they waited until they could actually be the story. They were
Right.
old enough developmentally to be that story and to take it in, and so that it means something. You know,
Right.
for these guys that learn to read like kind of like monkeys.
Right. Like
It's you know, what does Shakespeare say? It's a tale told by an idiot, full of
Right.
sound and fury, full of sound and fury, but signifying nothing. It has no meaning, no visual meaning.
Right.
So if a kid hates to read, he's telling you something. He's telling you there's something missing. I mean, think of that world that opens up to kids when they get to read. I mean, it's amazing. So, talking about synesthesia, why it's so important in every aspect of learning, and our summary of learning styles and strategies, effective learning, specific mental processes and strategies. Every person has our general learning style, which is going to have our basic strengths, either auditory or visual, musical, artistic, you know, those basic areas. And then we're also going to exhibit specific strategies for different types of information. And we have 2 strategies. This is really important. We all have, in my experience, we have our primary strategy, and you'll see this when you start working with more kids. You'll see when the information is of below the threshold of a certain complexity, they will have a very simple, elegant strategy. It may be auditory or auditory digital. It may be visual, but it's going to be very simple and straightforward. When you hit a certain threshold, whether it's a math problem, spell fish, F-I-S-H, spell house, H-O-U-S-E, spell success, S. Obviously I'm exaggerating, but not by much actually. Okay? Boom! You hit the strategy. And guess what? Every question, every time he's asked to go over that level of complexity, he goes to his backup strategy, which doesn't work because he's like looking around in the dark with a flashlight. And actually, when they do that with math, this is what happens. This is why you got to get over it with math. By the time they get the answer to the first part of the question, they've forgotten what the original question is.
Yes.
And then they have to start again.
And I've tried to explain to
And
him, if you just write down that one little number when you get to it, just that one number, you know, and then, but no, we can't do that.
Yeah. So I can show you ways that you can. I have kids that they do two-digit multiplication in their heads with no problem.
Yeah, he does that too.
Yeah. And I also explain why you don't always want to do that. It's counterproductive.
Because teachers don't give you credit.
Yeah. Effective learning strategies must include an internal check or synesthesia. Many of the symptoms of ADHD and other pervasive developmental disorders seem to be the result of an unconscious and highly evolved stress response. Great for football, soccer, baseball. I love in my profile. You know, what does your son do for fun? Oh, he plays football. He does soccer. He's skateboarding, snowboarding. You know, but he hates reading, hates this, hates math, hates.
Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. Not surprised. Dyslexia. At least some of the symptoms seem to be the misuse of that natural mental strategy for processing real-world three-dimensional information, which is great because it gives us a tool for helping them. I'm not going to say fix the problem, but overcoming that that strategy, that difficulty, at least with reading. If you change a person's strategy for processing information, you change the way they learn. So what can any parent do? One, understanding that our child has their own unique strategies and styles. We get to know our children's style. Get to know it. Understand, where are they strong? Where are they weak? Where do they struggle? Where do they succeed? And now we've got some tools to say, you know what? Well, if he can do that over here, well, what if we use that strategy, we tweak it a little bit, we use the natural ability, tweak the strategy so that it can be effective over here. When I'm working with kids, instead of strategies, I call them recipes. We have a recipe for homework. We have a recipe for getting up in the morning and going to school. We have a recipe for going to bed. Recipes for everything. We have recipes for English, science, math, history, you name it, we got a recipe for it.